The sound echoed louder than it should have. It wasn't just the sharp crack of skin against skin. It was the silence that followed, thick, suffocating, stretching far longer than a single moment should. It filled the room, crept into the corners, pressed against my chest until I could barely breathe. My head had turned with the force of it. A strand of hair fell across my face, and for a second I didn't move. I couldn't. My brain hadn't caught up with what had just happened. Samir stood in front of me, his chest rising and falling rapidly, his eyes wide, not with regret, not yet, but with something raw and unfiltered. Anger, yes, but also something uglier, something that said he believed he was justified. My cheek burned. Slowly, almost mechanically, I lifted my hand and touched it. The heat radiated beneath my fingertips, stinging real. This wasn't a nightmare. This wasn't one of those dramatic scenes you see in stories and promise yourself would never be your reality. This was happening. To me. You pushed me to this? He muttered, his voice lower now, but still edged with irritation, as if I had inconvenienced him. The words didn't make sense at first. They floated in the air between us, meaningless, until they suddenly clicked into place. And when they did, something inside me twisted. 7 years. 7 years of being careful with my words, of measuring my tone, of choosing silence over conflict. 7 years of telling myself that marriage required compromise, that patience was strength, that love meant enduring. And somehow, in his mind, it had led to this. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The man I had married stood there, but he felt like a stranger. The softness I once saw in his eyes was gone, replaced by something hardened, something entitled. His hand, that hand, was now hanging loosely by his side, as if it had already forgotten what it had done. Say something, he snapped when I didn't respond. My lips parted, but no words came out. What was I supposed to say? That it was okay. That I understood. That I was sorry. Because wasn't that what I had always done? Apologized, even when I wasn't wrong. Smoothed things over. Made things easier for him. But this time something stopped me. Something deep, quiet, but unshakable. I lowered my hand from my cheek. The burning sensation remained. But it no longer felt like just pain. It felt like a mark, a line that had been crossed, one that could never be erased. It was just a slap, Samir added, running a hand through his hair as if trying to dismiss the entire moment. Don't make it a big deal. Just a slap. The words echoed in my mind, and for a brief second I almost laughed. Just a slap, as if respect could be measured in degrees. As if dignity had levels. As if this was something small enough to ignore. I swallowed, my throat dry. Behind him, I could hear faint noises from the kitchen, his mother moving around, utensils clinking. Life continuing unaware or perhaps unconcerned. Or maybe she knew. Maybe she had heard, and maybe she didn't care. The thought settled heavily in my chest. Why are you looking at me like that? Samir asked, his tone shifting now, irritation giving way to discomfort. I said I didn't mean it like that. But he hadn't said sorry. Not once, and somehow, that said everything. I took a small step back. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was instinctive, a quiet movement driven by something I hadn't fully understood yet. Distance. I needed distance. Samir noticed. His brows furrowed slightly, his jaw tightening again. Don't start acting dramatic, he warned. You know how you get? There it was again. That familiar tone. The one that turned everything back on me. The one that made me question myself. The one that had, over the years, slowly chipped away at my confidence until I no longer trusted my own reactions. But this time it didn't land the same way. This time, instead of shrinking, something inside me stilled. I wasn't confused. I wasn't questioning myself. I knew exactly what had happened. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the urge to fix it. Samir took a step closer. I've had a long day, he said, as if that explained everything. You keep arguing, pushing, and then you expect me to stay calm. Arguing. All I had done was ask him why he came home late again. Why he didn't answer my calls. Why he dismissed me every time I tried to talk. Was that arguing? Or was that existing? I started, my voice barely above a whisper. But I stopped myself. Because I suddenly realized something. It didn't matter what I said. It never had. Samir sighed loudly, clearly annoyed now. Forget it, he said, waving his hand dismissively. I don't have the energy for this. And just like that, he turned away. Turned away, as if the moment was over. As if I was something that could be paused, ignored, dealt with later, or not at all. I stood there, still rooted to the spot, watching his back as he walked toward the bedroom. The same bedroom we shared. The same space that had once felt like home. Now it felt different. Everything felt different. The walls, the air, the silence. Even me, I didn't follow him. I couldn't. Instead, I slowly sank down onto the edge of the sofa, my legs suddenly too weak to hold me up. My cheek still burned, but the pain had dulled into something deeper, something heavier. Not just physical, emotional, mental. It was the realization that this wasn't just about one moment. This was about every moment that had led to it. Every time I stayed quiet. Every time I accepted less than I deserved. Every time I convinced myself that things would get better if I just tried harder. I stared at my hands, resting in my lap. They were steady. Surprisingly steady. Because inside me the storm wasn't chaotic, simple. This wasn't love. This wasn't respect. And this wasn't a life I was willing to keep living. I took a deep breath, slow and steady, letting it fill my lungs, grounding me. Then I exhaled, and with that breath, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't confront him again. Instead, I sat there in the quiet, holding on to that clarity like it was the most important thing I had ever found. Because in that moment, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. Being underestimated, being silenced, being pushed aside. It doesn't break you, not always. Sometimes, it wakes you up. The room felt unfamiliar, even though I had lived in it for years. I sat in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection like I was looking at a stranger. The soft yellow light above the dressing table flickered slightly, casting uneven shadows across my face. The faint redness on my cheek had started to fade, but I could still see it if I looked closely enough. And I did. I kept looking. As if I needed proof that it had really happened. My fingers hovered near my face but didn't touch it this time. I didn't need to feel the sting again. It wasn't the pain that mattered anymore, it was what it meant. I tilted my head slightly, studying my own eyes. They looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. Something deeper. Something that had built up slowly over time, layer by layer, until it became a part of me. When did this happen? I whispered to myself. The question wasn't about the slap. It was about me. When did I become this version of myself? I tried to remember the girl I used to be. And for a moment, she felt so far away that I wondered if I had imagined her. But then, slowly, pieces of her came back. I remembered laughing without hesitation, speaking without fear, having opinions that I didn't apologize for. I remembered walking into rooms without second, guessing myself, without wondering if I was being too much or not enough. I used to dream. Big dreams. A career I was passionate about. Independence. A life where I stood on my own feet, not just as someone's daughter or someone's wife, but as myself. And my father, he had always believed in that version of me. Never let anyone make you feel small, he used to say. I closed my eyes for a second, hearing his voice so clearly it almost hurt. Because somewhere along the way I had done exactly that. I had let myself become smaller. Not all at once. It didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, subtle, almost invisible. The first time Samir suggested I quit my job, it didn't feel like control. It felt like care. Why do you need to work so hard? He had said, smiling. I earn enough for both of us. You should relax. At the time, it sounded comforting. Like I was being taken care of. Like I didn't have to carry everything alone. So I agreed. I told myself it was temporary. That I could always go back later. But later never came. Then came the small comments. You don't need to argue about everything. You think too much? Just let it go. Each sentence was light on its own. Easy to dismiss, easy to justify. But together they built something. A quiet cage. I stopped sharing my opinions as much. I started choosing my words carefully. I began measuring my reactions, calculating what would keep the peace, what would avoid conflict. And somehow, without realizing it, I stopped being heard. Samir's mother made sure of the rest. From the very beginning, I knew she didn't fully accept me. It wasn't always obvious. Sometimes it was just a look, a pause, a comment disguised as advice. A good wife doesn't talk back. A daughter-in-law should adjust. Respect comes from silence. I heard those words so often that they started to feel normal. Expected. I told myself this was just how things were, that every household had its own rules, that I just needed to adapt. So I did. I adapted until I barely recognized myself. I stopped wearing certain clothes because she didn't like them. I stopped calling my friends as often because it looked bad. I stopped visiting my father unless it was necessary, because it somehow became an issue every time I did, and every time I gave something up, I told myself it wasn't a big deal. It was just a small sacrifice. But no one talks about how small sacrifices add up, how they slowly take pieces of you until one day, you look in the mirror and don't know who you are anymore. A faint sound from outside the room pulled me back to the present. Louder. Samir's voice. Casual. Normal. As if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't just been standing in front of him, shocked and silent, trying to understand how things had gotten so far. I opened my eyes again and looked at my reflection. There was something different now. Not in my appearance, but in the way I was looking at myself. For the first time in years, I wasn't avoiding my own gaze. I wasn't looking away. I was facing it. Facing everything. The silence. The compromises. The excuses. The truth. A lump formed in my throat, and this time, I didn't try to swallow it down. Tears filled my eyes, blurring my vision, but I didn't look away. I let them fall. Slowly. Quietly. Not out of weakness, but out of release. Because I finally understood something that I had been avoiding for a long time. This didn't start with the slap. The slap was just the breaking point. The visible crack in something that had been damaged for years. And the hardest part wasn't accepting what Samir had done, it was accepting what I had allowed. The silence. The shrinking. The constant need to make things work, no matter what it cost me. I wiped my tears gently, taking a shaky breath. Enough, I whispered. The word felt unfamiliar, but also right. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't have a plan. I didn't suddenly feel strong or fearless, or ready to walk away from everything. But I did feel something important. Awareness. And once you see something clearly, you can't unsee it. I looked around the room again. The same furniture, the same walls, the same life I had built. But it didn't feel the same anymore. It felt like a place I had outgrown. Or maybe a place that had never truly been mine. My eyes fell on my phone, lying quietly on the bedside table. Such a simple object, and yet, in that moment, it felt heavy with possibility, connection, support. Truth, I hadn't told anyone about what I was going through. Not my friends, not my family, not even my father, especially not him. Because I didn't want him to worry. I didn't want him to think that I wasn't happy, that I had made a mistake. But now, sitting there, with everything laid bare in front of me, I realized something. Hiding the truth didn't protect anyone. It only trapped me further. My fingers tightened slightly as I stared at the phone. 100 thoughts ran through my mind. What would I say? How would I explain it? Would he be disappointed? Would he be angry? Would everything change? And then another thought came, quieter but stronger than the rest. What if this is the moment everything needs to change? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. My heart started to race, not from fear but from something else. Anticipation. The kind that comes right before you step into the unknown. I reached for the phone. My hand hesitated for just a second. One last moment of doubt. One last chance to stay silent. To pretend. To continue as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't do that anymore. Not after tonight. Not after finally seeing the truth. My fingers wrapped around the phone, holding it tightly. And in that simple, quiet action, something shifted again. Because this time, I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't staying silent. I was choosing to be heard. Even if my voice trembled. Even if it broke. Even if it changed everything. Especially if it changed everything, my thumb hovered over his name for longer than it should have. Abu. It was saved exactly like that, just as it had always been. Simple, familiar, safe. I stared at the screen. My reflection faintly visible against the dark background. My heart was beating faster now, each second stretching into something heavier, harder to move through. Why was this so difficult? It was just a phone call, just a conversation. And yet it felt like so much more. Because this wasn't just about telling him what happened. It was about breaking the silence I had carefully maintained for years. It was about admitting that things weren't okay. That I wasn't okay. And that terrified me more than anything else. I had always been the strong one in his eyes, the daughter who could handle anything, the one who reassured him that she was happy, settled, at peace. I had protected that image, even when it meant hiding the truth. Especially when it meant hiding the truth. My thumb trembled slightly as I pressed the call button before I could change my mind. The phone rang. Once, twice. Each ring felt louder than the last, echoing in the quiet room around me. I almost hung up. A sudden wave of doubt crashed over me. What if he was busy? What if I couldn't say the words once he picked up? What if I broke down completely? But before I could act on any of those thoughts, the line clicked. Hello, his voice. Calm, steady, familiar, and just like that, everything I had been holding back for years rose to the surface all at once. Abu, that was all it took. One word. My voice cracked so sharply that I barely recognized it. There was a pause on the other end. Not long, but long enough for him to understand that something was wrong, deeply wrong. What happened? He asked, his tone changing instantly. No hesitation, no confusion, just concern, pure and immediate. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The words were there. I could feel them, pressing against my chest, tightening my throat, but they refused to form. How do you explain something like this? How do you summarize years of silence, of compromise, of slowly losing yourself into a few sentences? My voice broke again, weaker this time. I hated how fragile I sounded. Hated how exposed I felt. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Don't apologize. He interrupted gently, but firmly. Just tell me, are you safe? The question hit me harder than anything else. Safe. I glanced around the room, as if trying to find the answer in the walls, the furniture, the quiet stillness around me. Was I safe? Physically, yes. Samir wasn't in the room, the door was closed. There was no immediate danger. But emotionally, mentally, I wasn't sure anymore. I think so, I said softly. There was another pause. This one felt different. He was thinking. Processing. And I knew him well enough to understand what that silence meant. He was already preparing. What happened? He asked again, slower this time. More deliberate. And this time I didn't stop myself. It was just an argument. I began, the words coming out unevenly. Nothing serious at first. I asked him why he came home late, and he got irritated. And then, we started arguing a little, and I didn't even say anything that bad. I stopped. Because saying it out loud made it real. More real than it had felt just moments ago. My grip on the phone tightened. And then, he prompted quietly. I closed my eyes. And I said it. He slapped me. The silence that followed was deafening. No reaction. No immediate response. Nothing. But somehow, that nothing felt heavier than any words could have been. I could almost hear the shift on the other end. The stillness before a storm. Did he hurt you anywhere else? He asked finally, his voice lower now. Controlled. Too controlled. No, I whispered. Just that. Just that. The words felt wrong as soon as I said them. Because it wasn't just that. But I didn't know how to explain it yet. Listen to me carefully, he said, his tone steady but carrying an edge I hadn't heard in years. Are you alone right now? Wes. Good, stay there. Lock the door if you need to. My breath caught slightly. Abu, it's okay, it's not okay. The way he said it made me fall silent. Not loud, not angry, but final. Firm in a way that didn't leave room for argument. I sat there, holding the phone close, my heart pounding as something shifted inside me again. Not fear, not exactly, something else, relief. Because for the first time since it happened, someone wasn't minimizing it. Someone wasn't brushing it aside. Someone was seeing it for what it was. I'm coming, he said. The words were simple, direct, uncomplicated, and yet they carried so much weight. My eyes widened slightly. No, you don't have to. I do. There was no hesitation, no doubt. Just certainty. It's late, I tried again weakly. You can come tomorrow, I'll be fine. You called me? He said. Softer now, but no less firm. That means it's not something that can wait. I didn't know what to say to that. Because he was right. I wouldn't have called if it wasn't serious. If something inside me hadn't finally reached its limit. I should have told you earlier. I admitted quietly, the guilt creeping into my voice. I just didn't want to worry you. I thought I could handle it. You don't have to handle everything alone, he replied. The words hit something deep inside me, a place I had ignored for too long. I'm your father, he continued. It's my job to worry. A small, broken laugh escaped my lips despite everything. That sounded like him. Always calm, always steady. But underneath it all, fiercely protective. I'm sorry, I whispered again. This time, he didn't stop me. Instead, he said something else. Open the door when I arrive. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? But the line had already gone silent. He had hung up. I stared at the phone for a few seconds, my thoughts racing. Something about his tone. The way he ended the call. It felt different. More serious than I expected. More deliberate. I placed the phone down slowly, my hands still slightly unsteady. The room felt quieter now, but not in the same suffocating way as before. This silence felt expectant, like something was about to happen. I didn't know what he was planning. I didn't know what would happen when he got here. I didn't know how Samir would react. But strangely, those questions didn't scare me as much as they should have. Because beneath all the uncertainty, there was something steady holding me in place. Trust. For years I had distanced myself from that feeling. Convinced myself that I had to manage things on my own. That asking for help meant weakness. But now, sitting there, waiting, I realized how wrong I had been. Asking for help didn't make me weak. Staying silent had. I stood up slowly and walked toward the door, my steps measured, my mind clearer than it had been in a long time. I turned the lock with a soft click, not because I was afraid, but because for the first time, I was choosing myself. And as I stepped back, leaning lightly against the wall, I felt something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Not anxiety, not doubt, but something stronger, something I hadn't felt in years, safety, because I knew one thing for certain. He was coming. And when he did, nothing would be the same again. The house felt different the next morning. Not quieter, not louder, just heavier. Like the walls themselves were holding onto something unspoken. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. The movement, the impact, the moment everything shifted. But alongside it, there was something else now. The memory of my father's voice. Calm, certain, unshaken. I'm coming. Those words stayed with me through the night, echoing in my mind like a promise. Samir, on the other hand, behaved as if nothing had happened. When I stepped into the kitchen, he was already at the table, scrolling through his phone, sipping tea like it was just another normal morning. He didn't look up when I entered. Didn't acknowledge me. Didn't even pretend. It was as if I had imagined everything. His mother stood near the stove, stirring something in a pan. The smell of fried onions filled the air, sharp and familiar. She glanced at me briefly, her eyes scanning my face for a fraction of a second. If she noticed anything, she didn't say it. Of course she didn't. You're late, she said instead, her tone clipped. A decent daughter-in-law wakes up before everyone else. I didn't respond. I walked past her quietly, my movements slow but deliberate. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand steady despite the tension building in the room. Samir shifted slightly in his chair. Ami, just leave it, he muttered, though there was no real conviction in his voice. She was probably tired. Probably tired. The understatement almost made me smile. I took a sip of water and leaned lightly against the counter, my eyes drifting toward the clock on the wall. In 10:42 a.m. I didn't know exactly when my father would arrive. He hadn't said. But I knew he would. And for some reason, that was enough. What's that look for? Samir suddenly asked, his voice sharper now as he finally looked up from his phone. I met his gaze calmly. What look? That one, he said, frowning slightly. You've been acting strange since last night. Strange. I almost laughed again. But I didn't. Instead, I held his gaze, not challenging him, not backing down either. Just steady. I'm fine, I said simply. The words were neutral, but something in my tone must have unsettled him. Because he looked away first. And that was new. His mother placed a plate on the table with more force than necessary. If you're fine, then start acting like it, she said. There's work to be done. I nodded faintly. Not in agreement. Just acknowledgement. Then I moved to pick up a cloth and began wiping the already clean counter, more out of habit than necessity. Minutes passed. The quiet stretched. Samir returned to his phone. His mother busied herself in the kitchen. And I waited. Every small sound made my attention shift. The hum of a passing car, footsteps outside, a distant voice. Each one sending a brief spark of anticipation through me before fading again. Until finally, the doorbell rang. Once, clear, sharp, final. Everything in the room stilled. Samir looked up, annoyed. Who is it this early? His mother wiped her hands on her dupatta. Go check. He stood up lazily, stretching slightly as he walked toward the door, clearly expecting nothing out of the ordinary. But the moment he opened it, he froze. I saw it happen. The shift in his posture, the sudden stiffness in his shoulders, the way his hand tightened on the doorknob. Something was wrong, or rather, something had changed. What? Samir started, but the words got stuck. I stepped forward slightly, my heart beginning to pound, not with fear, but with something else, certainty. And then I saw him, my father, standing at the entrance, straight-backed, composed, his expression calm but unreadable. He looked exactly the same as he always did. And yet, completely different. There was a presence about him now. Something quiet but undeniable. The kind of presence that didn't need to announce itself to be felt. Behind him stood two men in formal suits. Strangers. Serious. Silent. And parked just beyond the gate was a car that didn't belong to this street. Sleek. Polished. Out of place in a way that immediately drew attention. Samir swallowed hard. Uncle, you should have told us you were coming? My father didn't smile. Didn't greet him the way he usually would. Instead, he stepped forward, not aggressively, not forcefully, but with a quiet authority that made Samir instinctively step aside. I told you once, my father said. His voice calm, controlled, carrying just enough weight to fill the entire room as he walked in. My daughter is not to be disrespected. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Heavy, unavoidable. Samir let out a nervous laugh, trying to recover. It was just a small misunderstanding, he said quickly, closing the door behind them. These things happen between couples. A misunderstanding doesn't leave marks. Silence. Complete and absolute. Samir's mother stepped forward then, her expression tight but attempting politeness. Bhai Sahib, you're taking this too seriously. It's a household matter. No. The single word cut through her sentence cleanly. My father turned his gaze toward her, not raising his voice, not showing anger, just firm, unwavering certainty. What's unnecessary, he continued, is the way you've treated her. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time since I had known her, she looked unsure. I stood near the edge of the room, watching everything unfold, my heartbeat steadying with each passing second. Samir glanced between us, his confidence slipping. This is being blown out of proportion, he insisted, though his voice lacked the strength it had earlier. I said I didn't mean it like that. My father didn't respond immediately. Instead, he gave a slight nod. The two men behind him stepped forward silently and placed a folder on the table. Samir frowned, confusion flickering across his face as he reached for it. What is this? He asked, flipping it open. And then, everything changed. I watched the color drain from his face. Line by line, page by page, his expression shifted from confusion to realization to something dangerously close to fear. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages. Business documents, legal papers, names, connections, details he clearly hadn't expected to see. Details he had never thought to question. You never asked who I was, my father said quietly, watching him. You only saw what you wanted. Samir looked up slowly, his eyes wide now. A quiet man, my father continued. With a quiet daughter. The room felt smaller somehow, tighter, like the air itself had thickened. Samir's mother stepped closer, trying to see the papers. What is all this? She demanded, her voice losing its earlier sharpness. But Samir didn't answer her. He couldn't. Because in that moment, he understood something he had never considered before. He had underestimated the wrong person. And not just me. My father took a slow step forward, his gaze steady, his voice calm but carrying a weight that pressed against every corner of the room. You thought silence meant weakness, he said. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the smallest sounds had disappeared. And I stood there, watching it all, feeling something shift deep inside me. Not fear. Not anger. Something stronger. Awareness. Because for the first time the balance of power had changed, and everyone in that room could feel it. The silence didn't break immediately. It stretched, thin, fragile, and dangerously tense, like something that could snap at the slightest movement. Samir was still staring at the papers in his hands, but he wasn't really reading them anymore. His eyes moved across the page without focus, his mind clearly trying to catch up with what he had just discovered. I could see it happening. The shift, the unraveling. For years he had carried himself with a quiet confidence that came from control. Control over his home. Control over conversations. Control over me. But now that control was slipping, and he didn't know how to hold on to it. What is this? He asked again, his voice lower this time, stripped of its earlier certainty. My father didn't rush to answer. He stood calmly, his hands resting loosely at his sides, his posture straight but relaxed. There was no need for urgency. No need to explain himself in a hurry. Because the truth was already doing the work. You've built a business, my father said finally, his tone measured. A decent one, from what I can see. Samir swallowed, his grip tightening on the papers. Yes, I have. And you're proud of it. It wasn't a question. Samir hesitated, then nodded slowly. Of course. My father gave a faint nod in return, acknowledging it. Good, he said. You should be. There was something almost unsettling about the calmness in his voice. No anger, no raised tone, just a steady, deliberate presence that made every word feel heavier. But tell me something, he continued, his eyes locking onto Samir's. Do you think it's untouchable? Samir blinked, clearly thrown off. I don't understand. My father didn't look away. Do you think it exists in a vacuum? He asked. Independent of influence, of connections, of systems you don't see. Samir's throat moved as he swallowed again. Because now, he was starting to understand, and he didn't like it. I never interfered. My father went on, his voice still calm. Not in your marriage. Not in your home. Not in your decisions. That was true, painfully true. In all these years, my father had never once stepped in, never questioned Samir, never challenged him. He had trusted me, and I had stayed silent. But silence, my father added, his gaze flicking toward me for just a brief second before returning to Samir, should never be mistaken for absence. The words settled heavily in the room. Samir looked down at the papers again, his hands now visibly unsteady. These connections, he said, his voice quieter now. These partnerships, they're linked to me. My father finished simply. Samir's head snapped up. The realization hit him fully now. Not partially, not vaguely, completely. Everything he had built, everything he thought stood on its own, was more connected than he had ever imagined. And the man he had dismissed for years was standing right in front of him. This doesn't mean anything. Samir tried, though the words came out weak, unconvincing even to his own ears. You're trying to intimidate me. No, my father said, just one word, clear, final. I'm showing you reality. Samir opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Because there was nothing left to argue with. Facts didn't need emotion. They didn't need volume. They simply existed. Samir's mother stepped forward again, her composure cracking now. Enough of this, she snapped, though her voice lacked its usual sharpness. You're turning a small issue into something big. It was just an argument between husband and wife. And your son raised his hand. My father's voice cut through hers without effort, not louder, but sharper, more precise. She stopped mid-sentence. Because this time there was no way to redirect it. No way to soften it. No way to pretend it hadn't happened. Samir ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly now, his movements restless. I said I didn't mean it like that, he insisted. It just happened. I was angry. It won't happen again. There it was, the apology. Late, rushed, incomplete. He finally looked at me then, his eyes searching my face, trying to find something, sympathy, understanding, anything that might help him regain control of the situation. But I didn't give it to him, I just looked back. Calm, steady, unmoved. And that seemed to unsettle him more than anything else. You know me, he said, his voice softening slightly as he took a step closer. You know I'm not like that. I felt something shift inside me at those words. Not doubt. Not confusion. Clarity. Because I realized something in that moment. It didn't matter whether he believed he was like that or not. He had done it. And that was enough. You didn't stop yourself, I said quietly. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Samir froze. What? He asked, as if he hadn't heard me properly. You didn't stop yourself? I repeated, my gaze holding his. That means somewhere. You thought it was okay. The words hung in the air, undeniable. Samir's expression faltered, his confidence cracking further. That's not true, he said quickly. You're twisting it. No, I interrupted, still calm. I'm seeing it clearly. For the first time in years, I wasn't second guessing myself. I wasn't softening my words to make them easier for him to accept. I was simply speaking, and it felt unfamiliar. But right. Samir looked between me and my father, his breathing uneven now. What do you want? He asked finally, the question slipping out in frustration. What is this about? Money? Control? What? My father didn't react to the accusation. Didn't even acknowledge it. Instead, he took a slow step forward. This, he said, his voice steady, is about accountability. The words settled into the room like a weight, heavy, unavoidable. You made a choice, he continued. And now you will face the consequences of that choice. Samir's jaw tightened. And what exactly does that mean? My father didn't answer immediately. He turned slightly, his gaze shifting toward me. Not commanding. Not instructing. Just waiting. Giving me space. Giving me the choice. And in that moment, I understood something important. This wasn't about him taking control. This wasn't about him fixing things for me. This was about me deciding what came next. The power wasn't his, it was mine. For a second, the room faded into the background. The tension. The silence. The weight of everything that had just been revealed. It all became secondary. Because the real question wasn't what Samir deserved. It was what I deserved. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't hesitate to answer that. I lifted my chin slightly, my voice steady when I spoke. This isn't about revenge. Samir blinked, clearly caught off guard. It's about respect, I continued. Something I should have never had to ask for. The words felt like a release. Like something I had been holding back for years had finally found its way out. Samir shook his head, running his hands through his hair again. I said I'm sorry. He repeated, more urgently now. What else do you want me to do? I looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time I didn't see my husband. I saw a man who had taken me for granted. Who had mistaken my silence for weakness. Who had believed that I would always stay, no matter what. And in that moment, I knew something with absolute certainty. That belief was about to be proven wrong. The room felt like it was holding its breath. No one spoke after my last words. Not Samir. Not his mother. Not even my father. It was as if everything had reached a point where words were no longer enough, where something bigger had to be decided. And somehow, all of it pointed back to me. Samir's eyes didn't leave my face. There was something desperate in them now, something I had never seen before. Not anger, not irritation, fear, real fear. I said I'm sorry, he repeated, his voice softer this time, almost pleading. It won't happen again, I swear. The words echoed in the silence, but they didn't land the way he expected them to. Because I had heard apologies before, not for something like this, but for other things, for dismissing me, for raising his voice, for making me feel small. Each time, it came with the same promise. It won't happen again. And each time I had believed him. Or maybe I had wanted to believe him. But standing there now, looking at him, not as his wife trying to make things work, but as myself, I saw those words for what they really were. Too late. Too easy. Too empty. You're not understanding? Samir said quickly when I didn't respond. People make mistakes. I made one. That doesn't mean everything has to end. End. The word lingered in the air. I hadn't said it yet. Not out loud, but now that he had it felt real. Closer. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My heart wasn't racing the way it had been earlier. There was a strange calm settling inside me, not the kind that comes from ignoring reality. The kind that comes from finally accepting it. For you, it's a mistake? I said quietly. For me, it's a line. Samir frowned slightly, confusion mixing with frustration. What does that even mean? It means, I continued, meeting his gaze without hesitation, you crossed something you don't get to come back from. The words were simple, but they carried everything I had been holding in. Every moment of silence, every compromise, every piece of myself I had given up to keep this marriage intact. Samir shook his head, stepping closer. No. No, you're overreacting. You're letting this become bigger than it is. There it was again. That instinct to minimize. To shrink what had happened. To make it easier to dismiss. But this time it didn't work. I'm seeing it for what it is, I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. And that seemed to frustrate him more than anything else. You think you can just walk away? He asked, his tone sharpening slightly, though the edge of desperation was still there. After everything. After 7 years? 7 years. I felt the weight of that number. Not as something that held me back, but as something that had already taken enough from me. I'm not walking away from 7 years. I said slowly. I'm walking away from what those 7 years have become. Samir's expression faltered. Because deep down he knew. He knew this wasn't just about last night. This was about everything. My silence, his control. The imbalance we had both pretended didn't exist. You can't just throw everything away like this, he insisted, his voice rising slightly now. Do you even hear yourself? I did. For the first time in a long time, I really did. And what I heard wasn't confusion. It was clarity. I'm not throwing anything away, I said. I'm choosing not to lose myself any further. The room went quiet again. Samir stared at me like he didn't recognize me. And maybe he didn't. Because the version of me he knew wouldn't have said this. Wouldn't have stood like this. Wouldn't have looked at him without fear, without hesitation, without the need to fix things. That version of me was gone. I'll change, he said suddenly, the words coming out quickly, urgently. Whatever you want, I'll do it. Just don't do this? I felt something tighten in my chest at that. Not doubt, but a kind of sadness. Because now he was willing. Now he was trying. Now he was saying the things I had needed to hear years ago. But it didn't matter anymore. Because some realizations don't come back once they arrive. You're saying that now. I replied softly. But where was that when I was trying? When I was asking? When I was still hoping? Samir didn't answer. Because there was no answer that could undo that. I took a small step back. Not out of fear, but to create space. Physical space to match what had already shifted emotionally. I'm leaving, I said. The words came out steady, final. And as soon as they did, something inside me settled. Completely. Samir's eyes widened. No, he said immediately, shaking his head. No, you're not. You can't just decide that on your own. I almost smiled at that. Because that was exactly the problem. The belief that I couldn't decide things on my own. That's where you're wrong, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I can. The simplicity of those 2 words seemed to hit him harder than anything else. He took a step toward me again, his hands slightly raised like he didn't know whether to reach out or not. Think about this, he urged. Don't make a decision like this in the heat of the moment. This wasn't the heat of the moment. That had been last night. This was something else entirely. I've been thinking for a long time, I said, and that was the truth. Maybe not consciously, maybe not in clear, defined thoughts, but somewhere inside me, something had been building. Slowly, quietly, until it reached this point. Samir's shoulders slumped slightly, the fight draining out of him. So that's it, he asked, his voice hollow now. You're just going to leave. I looked at him one last time. Not with anger, not with hatred, just honesty. I'm choosing myself, I said. The words felt heavier than anything I had said so far. Because they weren't just about this moment. They were about everything. Everything I had lost. Everything I was taking back. Samir didn't move. Didn't speak. He just stood there, staring at me as if trying to process a reality he had never prepared for. Behind him, his mother remained silent too, her earlier confidence completely gone. And my father, he didn't say a word. Didn't interfere. Didn't step in. He simply watched. Because he understood something that Samir was only just beginning to realize. This wasn't his decision to make. It was mine. I turned away slowly, my steps steady as I walked toward the room. Each step felt lighter than the last. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. I reached for my bag, my hands moving with quiet purpose as I began to gather what I needed. Not everything, just enough. Because this wasn't about running away. This was about moving forward. And as I zipped the bag closed, I paused for a brief moment, looking around the room one last time. The place that had once felt like my entire world. Now it felt like something I had outgrown. I picked up my bag and walked back out. No one stopped me. No one tried. And as I stepped past Samir, past the silence, past everything that had once held me in place, I didn't look back, because some choices don't need hesitation. And some endings are actually beginnings. The first few days felt unreal. Not painful in the way I had expected, not chaotic, not even overwhelming, just quiet. A different kind of quiet than the one I had lived with before. This one didn't suffocate me. It didn't press down on my chest or make me feel small. It gave me space. I stayed with my father at first. Not because I had nowhere else to go, but because for the first time in years, I allowed myself to be taken care of without guilt. His house hadn't changed much. The same familiar furniture, the same soft creak in the hallway floor, the same early morning routine. But being there again, as the person I used to be, not the version of me shaped by compromise, felt almost like stepping into a memory. The first morning, I woke up earlier than everyone else out of habit. For a moment, I panicked. My mind rushed to all the things I should be doing, preparing breakfast, cleaning, making sure everything was in order before anyone noticed I was awake. Then I remembered. I didn't have to do that anymore. No one was waiting to criticize me. No one was measuring my worth by how quickly I moved or how quietly I obeyed. I lay back down slowly, staring at the ceiling, letting that realization settle in. Freedom didn't come with fireworks. It came with small, quiet moments like that. Moments where you realized you were no longer walking on eggshells. My father never asked too many questions. He didn't push me to explain everything, didn't demand details I wasn't ready to give. Instead, he made space. We would sit together in the evenings, sometimes talking, sometimes just sharing the same silence. And for the first time, silence didn't feel heavy. It felt safe. One evening, as we sat on the veranda, he finally spoke about it. "Are you sure about your decision?" he asked gently. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I doubted myself, but because I wanted to answer honestly. I didn't leave because of one moment. I said after a pause. I left because I finally understood all the moments before it. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. "And now?" he asked. I looked ahead, watching the sky shift into soft shades of orange and purple. "Now I feel like I can breathe again." A faint smile touched his face. And that was enough. I didn't stay there forever. After a few weeks, I started rebuilding my own life again. Slowly, carefully. But this time intentionally. The first step was my career. Going back felt intimidating at first. I had been away for years. The world had moved on, evolved, changed in ways I wasn't fully part of anymore. But I hadn't lost everything. The skills were still there. The determination was still there. And more importantly, I was still there. I updated my resume, sent out applications, faced rejections, faced doubts. But I didn't let them stop me. Because this time, I wasn't trying to prove something to someone else. I was doing it for myself. When I finally got my first offer, it didn't feel like a victory over anyone. It felt like reclaiming something that had always belonged to me. My independence, my identity, my confidence. And with each passing day, I felt stronger. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a quiet, steady way that couldn't be shaken easily. Samir tried to reach out. At first it was messages, short, apologetic. "Can we talk? I miss you. I made a mistake." I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said. Then came the calls. Missed calls at first, then repeated ones. Then silence again. I watched it all from a distance, detached in a way I never thought I could be. Because the truth was I had already moved on emotionally long before I physically left. The final step was making it official. The legal process wasn't easy. It never is. There were questions, discussions, attempts from his side to work things out. But I stayed firm, not stubborn, not reactive. Just clear. And that clarity carried me through every step. When it was finally done, I expected to feel something overwhelming. Relief, said Lozier. But what I felt was something much simpler. Peace. A quiet, steady peace that settled deep inside me. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after that. There were still challenges. Still moments of doubt. Still days where I had to remind myself why I made the choices I did. But those moments didn't define me anymore. They didn't control me. Because I had something stronger now. Self-respect. And once you truly understand your worth, you don't negotiate it anymore. People around me started to notice the change. Friends I had lost touch with reached out again. Conversations felt easier, lighter, more real. I laughed more, spoke more, lived more. And for the first time in years, I wasn't holding parts of myself back. One day, while getting ready for work, I caught my reflection in the mirror. For a second, I paused. Not because I didn't recognize the person staring back at me, but because I finally did. There she was, the girl I thought I had lost. The one who spoke without fear. The one who believed in herself. The one who knew she deserved more. She had been there all along, waiting. And all it took was one moment, one breaking point, to bring her back. People often ask me if I regret leaving. If I ever think about what could have been. If I wonder whether things might have changed if I had stayed. And my answer is always the same. No. Because staying would have cost me something far greater than leaving ever did. It would have cost me myself. And that's a price I'm no longer willing to pay. What happened to me wasn't just a story of pain. It was a turning point. A moment that forced me to see clearly. To choose differently. To rise. Because the truth is, being underestimated isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of something else. Something stronger. Something unbreakable. And now, I'm not just someone who survived. I'm someone who chose to live. Fully. Freely. And on my own terms.